So, hi guys, before we proceed to the chapter 4, structural content, let us have an overview of the topic first. So, the new structural code of the Philippines is designed to meet these needs through various model codes and regulations, generally from the United States, to safeguard the public health and safety nationwide. Engineers, builders, and the construction industry refer to the National Structural Code of the Philippines to ensure that buildings such as high-rise condominiums can withstand tremors as high as magnitude 8. Developed by the Association of the Structural Engineers of the Philippines, or the ASEP, the NSCP is cited as a referral code of the National Building Code, the primary basis for the construction, design, use, and maintenance of all buildings in the country, since the latter does not specify standards for earthquake-resilient structures. Moreover, Chapter 4 refers to the structural concrete provision of the National Structural Code of the Philippines. This chapter provides minimum requirements for the design and construction of structural concrete elements of any building or other structure under requirements of the NSCP. This chapter thus covers the strength evaluation of existing concrete structures, and the purpose of this chapter is to provide for public health and safety by establishing minimum requirements for strength, stability, durability, and integrity of concrete structures. So let us now move on to section 414, which is the plain concrete. In this section, it implies about applying the design and plain concrete members, including members in building structures and non-building structures, such as arches, underground utility, gravity walls, and shielding walls. It is mentioned in the section that it shall not govern the design of a cast-in-place concrete piles and piers embedded in ground, and plain concrete shall not be permitted for columns and piles. Now for section 418, earthquake-resistant structures. This section shall apply to the design of non-pre-stressed and pre-stressed concrete structures assigned to seismic zone 4, and a reinforced concrete structural system not satisfying this section shall be permitted if it is not demonstrated by experimental evidence and analysis that the proposed system will have strength and toughness equal to or exceeding those provided by a comparable reinforced concrete structure satisfying this section. Now for section 420, the section shall apply to steel reinforcement and shall govern through material properties to be used for design, durability requirements, including minimum specified over requirements. Moreover, it is specified that in non-pre-stressed bars and wires, it shall be deformed except plain bars or wires are permitted for use in spiral. Section 423, strut and tie models. This section shall apply to the design of structural concrete members or regions of members where load or geometric discontinuities cause a nonlinear distribution of longitudinal strains within the cross-section. Any structural concrete member or discontinuity region in a member shall be permitted to be designed by modeling the member or region as an idealized structure. The strut shall be designed in accordance with the strut and tie method in section 423. So the strut and tie models shall consist of struts and ties connected at nodes to form an idealized truss. So let us move on to section 425, which is the reinforcement details. This section shall apply to reinforcement details, including minimum spacing, standard hooks, seismic hooks, and cross ties. Development of reinforcement, splices, bundled reinforcement, transverse reinforcement, post-tensioning anchorages, and couplers. For parallel non-pre-stressed reinforcement, placed in 2 or more horizontal layers, reinforcement in the upper layers shall be placed directly above reinforcement in the bottom layer, with a clear spacing between layers of at least 25 mm. Section 426, construction documents and inspection. This section addresses design, compliance, and inspection requirements that the licensed design professional shall specify in the construction documents if applicable. Now let's proceed to section 427, the strength evaluation of existing structures. The provisions of this section shall apply The provisions of this section shall apply to the strength evaluation of existing structures by analytical means or by load testing. If there is doubt that a part or all of a structure meets the safety requirements of this code and the structure is to remain in service, a strength evaluation shall be carried out as required by the licensed design professional or the building official. Section 428, the building code requirements for concrete tin. So the provision of this section shall apply to thin shell and folded plate concrete structures, including ribs and edge members. All provisions of this code not specifically excluded and not in the conflict with provisions of Section 428 shall apply to thin shell structures. So in Chapter 4 of the National Structural Code of the Philippines, we can find the two appendices, which is the Appendix A and Appendix B. So in Appendix A, this appendix presents information on size, areas, and weights of various steel reinforcement. Moreover, we can find the steel reinforcement information, ASTM standard reinforcement bars, and the WRI standard war reinforcement, which is in metric units. In the Appendix B, this appendix shows the equivalence between SI metric, MKS metric, and US customary unit of non-homogeneous equations in this code. So now, let us proceed to the Chapter 5 of the NSCP, which is the structural steel. The Chapter 5 of the NSCP were adopted through the American Institute of Steel Construction, or the AISC, by the Association of Structural Engineers of the Philippines. So this chapter was divided into three parts, such as the specification for steel members, seismic provisions for structural steel buildings and for composite structural steel and reinforced concrete buildings, and lastly, the specifications for design of cold-formed steel structural members. So this chapter sets forth criteria for the design, fabrication, and erection of structural steel buildings and other structures, where other structures are defined as those structures designed, fabricated, and erected in a manner similar to buildings with building-like vertical and lateral load-resisting elements. Where conditions are not covered by this chapter, designs are permitted to be based on test or analysis, subject to the approval of the authority having jurisdiction. So Part 1, Specification for Steel Members. Section 501, General Provision. It states the scope of the specification, summarizes reference specification code, and standard documents, and provide requirements for materials and contract documents. Section 502, Design Requirements. So it states the design requirements used in construction, summarizes reference specifications, provides basis through formulas, also illustration of ratios through tables. So the design of members and connections shall be consistent with the intended behavior of the framing system and the assumptions made in the structural analysis. Unless restricted by this chapter, lateral load, resistance, and stability may be provided by any combination of members and connections. Section 503, Stability Analysis and Design. It states this analysis of stability design requirements, summarizes reference specification, and also provides methods and calculations for required strengths. For the stability, it shall be provided for the structure as a whole and for each of its elements. Any method that considers the influence of second-order effects, flexural, shear, and axial deformations, geometric imperfections, and member stiffness, reduction due to residual stresses on the stability of the structure and its elements is permitted. So all component and connection deformations that contribute to the lateral displacements shall be considered in the stability analysis. Section 504, Design of Members for Tension. So this section provides methods and calculations of the tensile strengths, state basis for the dimensional requirements, and yield factors for connections to tension members. So for the section 505, Design of Members for Compression, it states the slenderness limitations and effective length, compressive strength for flexural buckling of member and for torsional and flexural torsional buckling of members. Without slender elements, also the dimensional requirements. Furthermore, it states the member with slender and stiffened slender elements. Excuse me. So, section 506, design of members for flexure. Excuse me. It shows the selection table for the application. States the doubly symmetric compact I-shaped members and channels bent about their major axis, and members with compact webs and non-compact or slender flanges bent about their major axis. So the lateral torsional buckling, compression flange, local buckling, and yielding. Also the square and rectangular HSS and back-shaped members. Excuse me, guys. So section 507, design of members for shear. So it states that the transverse stiffness, nominal shear strength with tension field action, single angles, rectangular and round HSS, weak axis shear in singly and doubly symmetric shapes. Also the beams of girders with web openings. Section 508, design of members for combined forces and torsion. So it states that the doubly and singly symmetric and asymmetric members subject to flexural and axial force. Also the members under torsion and combined torsion, flexure, shear, and or axial force. Section 509, design of composite. So it states the nominal strength of composite sections, material limitations, and shear connectors. It also specifies the axial members, flexural members, and flexural strength of concrete encased and filled members. Section 510, design of connection. So it states the design basis, simple connections, moment connections, compression members with bearing points, splices in heavy section, beam copes and weld axis holes, placement of welds and bolts, bolts in combination with yields, high strength bolts in combination with rivets, and limitations on bolted and welded connections. Furthermore, it also specifies the weld, bolts, and threaded parts, affected element of members and connecting element, filters, splices, bearing strength, column bases, and bearing on concrete, anchor rods on embedment, and flanges and webs with concentrated forces. Section 511, design of HSS and box member connections. So it states the definition of parameters, limits of applicability, and concentrated force, distributed transversely and longitudinally. It also specifies the HSS to HSS truss and moment connections. Excuse me. For the section 512, design for serviceability, it specifies the camber, deflections, drift, vibration, wind-induced motion, expansion and contraction, and connection slip. Section 513, fabrication, erection, and quality control. So it specifies the drawings, fabrication, shop painting, erection, and quality control. So in Chapter 5 of the NSCP, which is the structural steel, we can find 7 appendices. So Appendix A, inelastic analysis and design. Appendix A1 provides specification of its general provisions, materials, moment redistribution, local buckling, stability, and second-order effects, columns and other compression members, beams and other flexural members, members under combined forces, and connections. Appendix A2, design for punding. It provides specifications for simplified and improved design for punding. Appendix A3, design for fatigue. So, Appendix A3 provides specification of its general provisions, calculation of maximum stresses and stress ranges, and design stress range. Also, it specifies the fatigue design parameters such as the following. Section 1, plain material away from any welding. Section 2, connected material in the mechanically fastened joints. Section 3, welded joints joining components of built-up members. Section 4, longitudinal longitudinal welded and connections. Section 5, welded joints transverse to the direction of the stress, and Section 6, base metal at welded transverse. Member connections. Also in Section 7, it is the base metal at short attachments, and Section 8, miscellaneous. So now let's proceed to the Appendix A4, the structural design for fire conditions. So it provides criterion for performance objective designed by engineering analysis and qualification testing, and load combinations and required strength. It also specifies the structural design for fire conditions by analysis and qualification testing. Appendix A5, evaluation of existing structures. So it provides a specification of its general provisions, material properties, evaluation by structural analysis and load test, and evaluation report. Appendix A6, stability bracing for columns and beams. So it provides specifications of its general provisions, column bracing, beam bracing, and beam column bracing. Appendix A7, direct analysis method. It provides a specification of its general provisions, notional loads, and design analysis constraints. And now, John Francis and Agopra will report to you the Part 2 and Part 3 of the NSCP Chapter 5 Structural Steel. Thank you for listening.